Hi, Stitchers. Welcome to Tatreez Talk, where we share conversations about Palestinian embroidery. I'm Amani, here with my co-host Lena, chatting with talented embroiderers and artists, sharing their stories, inspirations, and cultural significance behind their work.
On today's episode, we're chatting with the one and only Wafa name, the researcher, educator, archivist, and the face behind Tatreez and Tea. She's the author of 2 books, has been giving a variety of Tatreez courses for years, including the first class that got me into Tatreez, and now is doing incredible research at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Welcome to Tatreez Talk, Wafa. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited. I know I mentioned this before we started recording, but so far, everyone we've spoken to has mentioned you as being some part of their Tatreez journey. And both Lena and I have always said you've been a part of both of our journeys. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, especially for us in the diaspora. You know, like sometimes it's very easy to feel disconnected from home. And for me personally, Tatreez definitely helps connect me and appreciate you honestly just putting Tatreez out there for people to find, because girl, it was very difficult. It was very, very difficult to find. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And it's really moving actually to hear that, because sometimes, and especially in times like this, it feels like sometimes when you're doing cultural heritage preservation work or you're in the arts, a lot of time it feels like you're like digging a mountain with a spoon, and like at times it feels so much like a vanity project to choose the arts as your work, but to know that there's been an impact, and like that's very moving, and it reminds me that this is really our inheritance as a community, and we all have a part, you know, in
Yes.
keeping this alive. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, no, of course. And I know that keeping Tatreez alive has really been a big part of your entire family history too. It's not necessarily new to you. So would love to start by you telling us how you started Tatreez.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think it's especially important when you're an educator to share your origination story in Tatreez. I learned it from my mother, Faria Al-Abbasi Ghanem. She taught it to me and my sisters. So it was very, very young age. I think there's a picture of me at 2 years old, helping her remove waste canvas and
Habibi.
yeah, and like untangling threads. And in fact, there's still a bag of threads at my mom's house where it's like tangled still from us playing with them when we were little, and she doesn't want to untangle them.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And so I learned from her, and she learned from her mother and grandmother. So there's really been an unbroken chain of passing this down in my family. And it's been really meaningful to me because when I was younger, my mom was always interviewed, because she also taught embroidery in the United States, Palestinian embroidery in the United States. And she was always kind of interviewed so I mean, same thing. I mean, I'm carrying the legacy of my mother in this work. And they would ask her, why are you doing this? Why are you sharing this with your daughters? Why are you teaching this? And she would always say, I want, when my children get older, I want them to know who I am and where I came from. And she's like, this is who I am. And I didn't always understand that when I was growing up with that, the depth of what she meant. And it's really in these particular moments where we're witnessing history in the making that we can really crystallize how important it is for us to have connection to our own cultural inheritance that is like beyond space, place, and time. It's generational, and it's in our blood.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I love that you do have this strong family history of Tatreez that hasn't been broken. That's so, so special. I'm curious to understand, like, with that strong connection to Tatreez, seeing your mother be a part of the diaspora and helping preserve Tatreez within the diaspora, like, did you always know that you were going to do this? Like, did you always know that Tatreez was going to become your full-time like life, really?
I didn't have any sense of that. When I was growing up, my mom, so because I learned this at such a young age, so 2 years old, let's just say I
Mashallah.
learned it at 2, okay?
Mashallah.
Very young.
Yeah.
So when I'm a mother now, when my son was 2 years old, I was trying to explain how to use a spoon, a fork, how to sit in a chair, things like that. Basic survival skills in life. If you were to teach your child Tatreez at 2 years old, it would become part of their survival skills toolbox.
Wow,
So
yeah.
when I was growing up, I didn't realize I knew something that other people didn't know and that it needed to be taught. I thought everybody knew this, all Palestinians knew this. And it was not until I released Tatreez and Tea that I began to get invited to speak. And it wasn't even until a couple of years after that that I realized I didn't have time to work anymore. I only had time for this work, and I had to quit my full-time job. And that's when I realized what the hunger, the thirst that was in our community that was just so very needed. And ultimately, the first few years of Tatreez and Tea, 2017, 2018, 2019, I was traveling a lot. I was traveling to all parts of North America. I had just started going international before pandemic. And I prayed and hoped that some of the students that I taught would then turn around and teach, because there was no way I could keep it up. I had a baby at that point. So it was like, it's just been a really wonderful outcome to see culture bearers emerge from the classes that could then go on and teach and carry this legacy on. But it's really thanks to my mom. My mom is who inspired me.
Wow. Sorry,
That's
I'm getting very
beautiful.
emotional, but that's so, so beautiful and so powerful. I just love this. Not only are you guys preserving within your family, but you're giving it to your larger Palestinian family, which is very much appreciated.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
thank you. And thank you for receiving my work and my presentation, because I also know that I don't have all the answers and there's no one right way to
Yep.
practice Tatreez. Different villages, different families had different ways. So I also do not take for granted the platform that I've been gifted to do this work and ultimately facilitate oral history. I mean, what a tremendous duty and honor. And it must remain as selfless as possible, because if you're facilitating oral history, you have to stay true to the spoken word, and you cannot wrap your own identity into that. And like, there has to be a great deal of integrity in the work in and of itself. So, so thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Of course.
Wafa, I would love to know more about the journey of Tatreez and Tea. So did it start off as you giving classes? Did the first book come out soon, like after you began? I'm curious about how it's evolved, because now you're at the Met. That's a big shift from where you started, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know sometimes how to explain it. I think when I wrote the book, it was meant to just document oral history. And at that point, I hadn't studied or read any Palestinian embroidery books. So what I was writing truly was what was told to me and what I learned. And I'm so glad that I resisted reading other books at that time.
Yeah.
When I released it, I began to be invited to teach. I mean, almost actually even right before I released it, because I had gotten funded from like arts organizations to do the book. So my work was already being discussed. And I started teaching. Of course, my first class I taught was with Mama. And it was like, you just got to know your place in the room when you're teaching with my mom, and she reminds you. But it was humbling very much. And in any case, it started off with things like that, like classes and lectures, but lectures about the book, so things that I learned. Then, 2020 hit with the global pandemic and all of us under lockdown. And there was I had an idea. Well, actually, it was a rumor that started on Instagram that I was going to offer free classes on Instagram Live.
I love the rumor, like the Instagram Tatreez rumor is like, what?
I don't know why it started, but I was like, that's a good idea. So I was like, I am. And
There you
I
go.
didn't even deny it. So it was like in April, I scheduled every weekend to teach free something free on Instagram Live, and I released free patterns, and they were really well attended, but there was just like this constant request to learn more. I'd get like lists of things in emails, do this, do that, do this. So I just tried to meet everyone where they were at, and I taught for those years, and there was a point where I taught like 8 to 10 classes a week.
Oh,
it was
wow.
so intense. I mean, I was teaching 10 p.m. at night, all weekend, every day, all day, and I would prepare and I would do work samples, do the patterns, do the PowerPoints. Like, it was a lot. In that like rigor, I had a lot of questions about the material I was reading, and I wasn't getting good enough answers in response. So, the elder community we have has done so much, outside of my mother. I've received guidance now from many elders, not just my mother. And some of their answers were like, why are you focusing on that? No, and it's almost a sense of like, we didn't leave a stone unturned. Don't go there. And I started getting more interested in research, and I wanted to get some of my questions answered. So I started looking at the museums locally to me, and that's when I found the Met. And I just started going and viewing, and I caught the attention of the curators because I was just in there blabbing about history, and they started coming in, and then they started taking notes, and then they started studying with me, and then it sort of just kind of naturally emerged, and I found that there was also a great need in museums to learn about their own collections of Palestinian dresses. And as that being a really important, like, accessibility to our community that can reinforce it, because these museum archival records have been managed for 100 years and don't even say it's from Palestine. So as Palestinians, we have to see our own image in the museum. It's a heritage. It's identity affirming. It allows us to like find hope in really sad, terrible moments in history. Like, museums serve ultimately as a beacon of hope. So I felt that so then that's kind of how I ended up in the museum context. Yeah.
Got it. That's so interesting. So the dress, if it was found or if it was donated to the museum in 1935, it's not labeled as what is historic Palestine.
Museum collections are not neutral. The act of collecting is not neutral. History writing is not neutral. Record keeping is not neutral.
Yep.
And when you look at many, and this isn't just the Met, just anywhere in the United States, even North America as a whole, you see that even if the donor said it was a Palestinian dress, at some point it was transferred to Islamic arts or Near East. And at some point then it was labeled as Bedouin, or it's usually around the 70s, 80s, 90s, Oslo Accords, or it's titled Judea, Samaria, or something. There's something or Greater Syria, because before 1948, they think Ottoman Empire, they call it Greater Syria. So there's all of these different ways, naming conventions. Sometimes it's not politically motivated. It was the common way of identifying things at the time. And a lot of times they don't really know what they have.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, as far as like, a lot of times it sounds like to me what you're saying too is like, a lot of times the history is I don't want to say lost, but maybe misplaced, right? How are you, like, what resources are you using to really dig that back up and course correct these museums and these collections?
The records are a result of a series of choices. I don't think that it was a by accident or anything like that. So just to be clear, I think that they were a choice. There was a choice made at some point that information was not important for whatever reason, motivating that. My main resource, number one, is a curator. Curator, not for information, but for their support. You can't really suggest changes to a collection without the consent and support of a curator who oversees the collection and who is ultimately responsible for that collection. So when I go in, usually, I mean, we have our texts that we have, but a lot of it that I've learned is through oral history. So some of the reasons why the record keeping hasn't been correct is because oral history hasn't been included in history writing or in academia. And this is kind of a new shift that's happening very recently where they're more open to a citation from an elder or a family name or something like that.
So when you see the dresses at the Met, for example, who do you go to? Are these elders like here in the U.S.? Are they Palestinians in Jordan and Palestine? Like how do you have that conversation? That's such a fascinating conversation to me because I had never thought of, like, I've heard of oral like storytelling, but not going to someone for a story. Like how do you go about that process, I guess?
Oh, that's very hard. I mean, by now, because I've been teaching Tatreez now for like 8 years, almost 8 years. I just have taught so many people. I mean, almost everybody at this point that wants to learn has learned from me. So usually in that network of people, they all have their own elders in their families. So a lot of times I'm working through students to access their parents or grandparents if they're around. There's also, there's like that, which is ultimately like the best resource.
Yeah, just tapping into the community directly.
Exactly. And then we do have institutions, like we have the Palestine Museum in Birzeit, we have Tatreez Center, we have Hanan Munayir's collection, we have Gillian Vogelsang Eastwood in the Netherlands, Textile Research Center. We have some really, Maha Abu Shoshe in Bethlehem, Maha Sekka in Bethlehem, Iman Sekka, her daughter in the United States. So many, I mean, like the field you can count it on your hands, you know? But there also, if I have any struggles sort of in whatever direction, I'm looking like I need a Majdalawi weaver who was there around 1967. Like it's a very specific ask, but these are the kinds of people I engage with. And then in terms of the process, oral history interviewing is definitely an art form. It's a lot of, it's a lot of listening. It's a lot of willing to be quiet and not show your knowledge, no matter what assumptions they're making about you being, you know, Palestinian born in America. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You just listen to what they have to say. Pretty much what the process is usually you need a number of interviews. The first interview, you're opening the file cabinet. The second interview, they're starting to pull out files. The third interview, they're pulling out the papers underneath the files that fell. So you got to let the memory unlock itself, and it takes time and a lot of patience.
Wow, that's incredible.
I can only imagine some of the conversations that you've had. Excuse me. So also with that, I know as a part of your work, as a part of preserving Palestinian culture, you also are on this mission to locate traditional dresses and rescue them. I'd love to understand more about how this started and what that looks like?
Yeah, I actually talk about this in Thobe, my book I released this last summer. Um, let me start here. Because the Tatreez and Tea community is just so vast and they're all over the place because it was all online classes. Like I now have kind of like foot soldiers all over the world keeping a lookout
A
with
little
a
Tatreez
visual,
army.
totally like a visual literacy of Palestinian embroidery and what it is. They might not know what village it is because they didn't do their studies with me correctly. They didn't do their reading. But
No shade.
okay, okay, no, just kidding. But they're aware, and so
Yes.
they're aware enough to say that's Palestinian. And what we were finding was that there's like collectors, vintage stores, dumps that have these dresses, and they're mislabeled entirely. Like again, an issue of invisibility and identification problems. So a lot of times in these vintage stores, though, they're like hundreds of dollars. So the average person isn't going to be able to like, quote, rescue it. But it started organically. Like one of my students in California wrote our Signal group chat and was like, I found a dress. It says dashiki. It's $250. I can't afford it. Here's a picture. This is Palestinian, right? We were all like, yes, it is. And then we just kind of came together as a community and fundraised and bought it. We sent Venmo'd her the money. She bought it and then she shipped it to me. And then now I preserve it here, photograph it, use it in my classes. And then it just sort of became this thing that we do where we're all just communicating every time we find something, even online. Like if somebody finds a seller on Instagram or I don't support Etsy's a problem all in of itself, but like eBay, something like that, then we kind of communicate. And I also, I'm also calling on the non-Palestinians out there who have acquired these collections to really interrogate what that motivation was and if this is something they want to continue. Because ethically, I think that they have an obligation to return these to our culture. This isn't just having an ethnic dress or however they're perceiving it. This is a community that is facing genocide, cultural erasure, cultural appropriation, all forms of violence. And cultural erasure is a form of violence. And when you're working with a community like that, when you have cultural objects from that community, you're engaging and you're not making it accessible. It's not like you're a museum or an institution. You're engaging, you're supporting cultural appropriation and cultural erasure, even if that's not your intention. And ultimately claiming any level of ownership on those dresses is unethical. It maybe legally belongs to you. Maybe legal ownership is yours, but ethical ownership is not. And so I'm really trying to compel non-Palestinians to consider what ownership really is in these cases and that it should return to us. And many have heeded the call. I mean, many have said, you're right. I had this dress in my closet because my mom gave it to me. And I really don't know what to do with that. I don't even really know what it is. I just know it's Palestinian, and then I've had Palestinians who have bought things online because they knew it was like endangered or whatever. And then they would be like, but I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to conserve or preserve this. What's a conservation tree? Like they don't have training in that field.
Of course, yeah.
So then they'll send it to me. So it's just sort of organically grown. And now there's like we were doing archival work last week and it's like the collection now for Tatreez Institute is like 100, maybe 150 objects.
Oh,
wow. Oh my God, that's amazing.
Wow.
Okay, when are you going to open up your own museum so we can go and see
Yeah,
it?
exactly.
I need an endowment. I need an endowment for that.
Where are the rich Palestinians that can hook our girl up? I know you're out there.
Yeah, stand up because I have enough. I have Syrian dresses, I have Palestinian, I have Jordanian, and then I have a little teeny tiny collection of like the rest of the world. So like Egypt, I have something from India, I have something from Afghanistan, a few things from Afghanistan.
Oh, I'm
So
sure they're
there's
beautiful.
it's all naturally emerging. Yeah.
Are they in your house? Like, where do you store them? They're all. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God, I'm coming to DC for a tour.
Under
Private
my
tour.
bed, under my bed, there was like we archived 46
Oh
objects in
my
the bin,
goodness.
and then and that was all we had time for.
Yeah.
'Cause then we went to the closet, and I have like 25 historic dresses just like hanging, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize there were 25. But then I also have two-seater chests full stuffed. So
Oh.
You're
So are you
teasing us
taking
now,
more, or
Wafa.
are you at capacity?
I'm never at capacity. No,
So then
I'll
what's the
always.
process? What, like if someone finds a Palestinian dress that needs to be rescued, what is the process?
If it's, you have to feel it out. If it's at a store and it's like $700,
Oh,
try to talk to the owner, see if they'll lower it for the purposes of for educational purposes, the Tatreez Institute. Um, you probably want to send me an email and ask me if it's even Palestinian. And usually when I get those types of emails, I respond right away to let you know, because usually you're in the store right then and there. And if they can drop the price and, you know, we have to, if they're willing to hold the dress for a few days, I'll fundraise. Like I'll full on fundraise, and we can fundraise in minutes. Like we can fundraise in minutes. So it's no problem. And then, and sometimes I have already donations set aside for rescuing. So I don't have to fundraise. I can just pull from the fund. And that's it. If you're able to if the seller wants to work directly with me to make sure it's stewarded properly, they can also do that. So those are the types of emails and requests I number one drop everything for and do, because it's really important to me. A lot of times these dresses end up in the garbage or cut up and sold in pieces on Etsy. So, so it's important for us to get to them while we can.
yeah. I'm curious too, with this, you talked about non-Palestinians and this call for them to, return our dresses. And you've said that some of them have already. I'm just curious, like, what type of relationship have you been able to build with these non-Palestinians through Tatreez?
So there's the makers who are not Palestinian that like to learn our embroidery. They're not usually the collectors. The collectors are usually just a different type of person. We joke actually that collecting is actually hoarding, but it's like
It's fancy hoarding.
so I'm
It's actually
definitely
true.
it is true. Yeah, if you come to my house. So so yeah, the collectors that are not Palestinian, usually they have I've had really good, I mean, I do want to also say that some of the collectors I work with that also donate to the Museum of the Palestinian People in Washington, D.C. So some of my experiences are all mixed in, even though I've properly stewarded those dresses to the museum, and those are separate from my own collection. A lot of the relationships I maintain are very positive. Like they want to do the right thing. In other cases, I'm meeting them at the end of their life. So I'm meeting someone for the first time that's supporting Palestine, that's terminally ill and is passing away in 2 weeks. And those are the kinds of experiences that are really delicate and sad, but they are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So I want to be there for them. I want to be there for the dress. I want to be there for the mother that made that dress and her legacy. And it's hard, but I go. So many of the people that have donated are not alive because they donated and died right after. In fact, one of my first donations was a big box of dresses. The day I received it, I was looking through it. It was just so much stuff. and it was all Syrian and Palestinian. I went to write him 2 days later. He had already passed.
Wow.
So it was like the last thing he did, pretty much. So it's a wide variety, but I again feel very privileged that I am somehow in this life like entrusted in this way. And it's very, very sacred and very important to me to safeguard this role that I have that is, it exceeds kind of like a job or a duty. It's like the spirit of, I don't know, there's like something ancestrally and spiritually that is really meaningful here, that people at the end of their life would want to connect with me in this way, and that I can give them also peace of mind before they pass. And so they're sort of, one of their last wishes would be something to be stewarded in this way, and that I can fulfill it. Well, that is very meaningful to me, not just for my own community, but also for them, you know?
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And so, you mentioned that this call to preserve these dresses is also a part of your latest book, thobe. And for those who still have not picked it up, which, why have you not picked it up yet? Can you tell us a little bit about what you could expect from this book?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. So, and for mentioning thobe. Thobe means our dress. I wanted to pick like a title of the book that was like thwabna. But then I said, no, these aren't just all the dresses are ours. Each and every single dress deserves to be our dress. Like it deserves for us to acknowledge each and every one. So I said, no, the book is thobe. And the idea of the book was to honestly like kind of give a love letter back to the community for all that they have done to support my work. I originally wrote it actually in a month, and like there was, I know, and then it was like a super sense of urgency last summer to release it. And I didn't know why. But the book included the rescued dress, some of the rescued dresses and their stories. It includes mostly patterns from the Intifada, First Intifada and Second Intifada, and a differentiation. Maybe a couple from the Oslo Accords, I don't remember. And now I know what that urgency was, but at the time, it was very mysterious to me. I didn't know why. I was like, I need to release this now. The community needs it now. We need to stitch these now. Even like one chest panel from the First Intifada is like, Bil-Ruh Bil-Dam Niftiki Falastin.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's like, just that spirit. And so that's really the book. And I wanted to write it also before I started doing any like research in museums, because I wanted this to be purely like political, to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like,
Love that.
I wanted it like a little bit of a Tatreez handbook for the revolution, a little bit.
Yes. A Tatreez handbook for the revolution. I am here for that. I love that.
Yeah.
I'm ready, girl. I'm ready.
Yes. Yeah. So that was really it. And also to talk a little bit about like symbolism and just answering questions that people have about color choices and what thread should I use per century, and like those kinds of difficult questions that none of the books had answered yet.
And then with that, I'm just curious too. You talked about the motifs and the symbolism and all that. Do you have a favorite like symbol that's tied to Palestinian resistance, to the revolution, if you will?
Oh, it changes all the time. I have always have so many favorites tied to the revolution. I really love for whatever reason, the calligraphy that either calligraphy or it's in the first Intifada, they didn't do calligraphy, honey. Mm-hmm. It was just like stitch whatever was on your mind. It didn't matter how even or symmetrical it was. They just used with what they had. And if they had electricity, whatever. So some mistakes. I love both the calligraphy that's really well designed as well as sort of the makeshift writing in the way that they stitched it. I think the protest chants are my favorite to have them because they really are so poignant in the context of the Intifada dresses, and also we're still using those same protest chants.
Yeah, we are. When you said "Birruh biddam," I was like, oh, my mom told me that when I was a little kid and she would put me on timeout, I would sit in the corner and with my hand up, "Birruh biddam nafdik ya amani." Always a little troublemaker. I was a little revolutionary.
Palestinian children, my son does similar things.
Oh, I believe it. He's such a cutie, mashallah. What would, also like for somebody who is picking up this book, what is like the major takeaway you want them to have after reading it?
The cover of the book is the back of the embroidery. And this is a direct response to the other publications that only have the front of the embroidery. This book is written to makers and to Palestinians in diaspora. And I really wanted, I feel like some of the lessons, because so many more people are teaching now, some of the lessons of Tatreez are being distorted a little bit by personal preference, but also through the contemporary lens we all carry and that we can't really set down, right? So this sense of perfectionism and like mechanization and everything being in the same direction on the back and none of those are historic ways of practice. They're just preferences, and that's okay. If people have those preferences, that's okay. But that's not the historic technique. So I wanted to just show a late 19th century piece and the back. And actually, if you look through, there's a number of historic pieces and the back. I'm always trying to show the front and the back because for us makers, we need to see the back to understand the strategy and to understand the construction and the methodology. And so much of our work is reconstruction. We're reconstructing, we're inventing and imagining, but we're also reconstructing. We're using historic methods to construct what we imagine. And therefore, we should study what it is that's inspiring us by looking at the back. When you're in a museum in the diaspora, you don't have touch privilege. You can't see the back. If it's in a display case, you can't see the back. So I thought, well, if I can get access to the back of the dresses, I want to share them so that everyone out there stitching, they can see for themselves what the historic technique is. Nobody's going to tell them or fool them that they have to make it all the same direction on the back. No, they can just pick up this book and look at the cover and they'll get the information they need.
I'm so glad you shared that because I get that question all the time. Like, is my back neat enough? Is it neat enough? And I'm like, yes, it's neat enough. You're doing Tatreez. It's like you're doing perfectly fine. And there's such a like anxiety almost that it's not good enough to be Palestinian. And this is coming from Palestinians. And it like really kind of breaks my heart because like you are already, by acting and being in this moment, like doing this practice, you are already part of this community of Tatreez artists, both now and in the past. And this is really good. I'm going to just like send this episode to all anybody that I teach and anybody who like asks me this question because I mean, I don't know. There's a kind of an obsession, right now around the neatness and that being a qualifier for it being Palestinian.
Yeah. I do have to say that this isn't that we do need to properly plan our projects. And so this isn't to encourage lack of preparation. No, there are certain mistakes in embroidery that throw off the entire piece, and those do need to be corrected. But in term, like if you have anchored the project correctly and you have an extra stitch here and extra off there, like it's fine. If you have a diagonal, fine. It doesn't matter. Those things didn't matter. And I do have to say, frankly, that over these years of teaching, it is always Palestinians who are hardest on themselves. And it's because it's a part of our cultural identity. And so when you don't have connection to this and you're stepping into it the first time, you're measuring yourself up. But I can say with confidence that your hands also have a memory, a muscle, ancestral muscle memory. It might take a minute for your hands to get the hang of it because it's new to your body, but your ancestors are in your hands. There's a muscle memory, the length of your fingers, your fingernails, the way your hands are, your wrists, all of it. Doesn't matter anything else, how long you've been working on a computer, doesn't matter. It's there. And when I've worked even with families before, like if one person has a tension issue, all of the kids, all their siblings have the same tension issue. It always happens. And I'm like, oh, you had a tension issue and you had it. Are you guys related? They'd be like, we're sisters. And it's like, I'm telling you, it's muscle memory in our bodies. Our ancestors are with us. So to give yourself a little bit of a break, if you have a tension problem with your stitching, let's take that for example, where you're pulling too tight on your stitches, 9 times out of 10, so did your great grandmother. And it was very hard for her for a while and she had to figure it out. Feel that connection. It's there.
Embrace it. I love that. That is so, wow, that's really powerful. And I will admit, I am definitely somebody who I have my preferences, but Lena's laughing because she knows, but like, I also like, I think it's important, like you said, it's like, it's fine to have your preferences, but I think you also need to name it. Like, I always say like, this is my preference. Do you like, or this is how traditionally it's done. Because at the end of the day, like Tatreez should be something that brings you joy. It should not stress you out. Like, don't stress out about a clean back to the point where like it gives you anxiety. Like, that's not what Tatreez is about at all. So
No,
I'm glad you say that.
Yeah, take it on like a challenge. I mean, the fun part is strategy.
Yes, it's the puzzle. It's a Tatreez puzzle, right?
Yeah.
So how can you rethink this motif? So you're going to try a strategy. It might not turn out the way you thought. Fine. Next time you stitch it, try a different strategy. Take notes. Have a book that documents what you're doing, what strategies you're doing. Oh, this worked, this didn't work. Yeah, you got to sketch it out a little. But that's how you improve if you really want to have mastery. Because in the traditional arts, which this is, you have the apprentice and you have the master. This is how they talk about traditional arts. So if you want to go from a student, which is an apprentice, to a master, you need to have tried a number of strategies and you need to settle on the strategy to the point where you don't have to necessarily look at your hands while you're stitching it. Your hands can see. Your hands have eyes. So this is what mastery is. And if that's what we're talking, there's no advanced expertise, beginner, that's all trash. There's no advanced what? Are you advanced with weaving? Are you advanced with cross stitch? Are you advanced with menagel? Are you advanced with color? Are you advanced with design? What are you advanced in? I hate those terms. You've either got mastery of the art form or you're working towards art mastery. And there's no in between. So this is what we're all trying to achieve, is being able to see with our hands. That's what mastery is.
I just love that. Yeah, I'm like, woo, chills. I love that. That's great. I completely wholeheartedly agree with you. And, you know, like I said, it should be bringing you joy, not stress and anxiety. So I love that. I guess, you know, is there anything else before we wrap up that you want to share with the listeners? I know we already said this, but we're definitely going to have Wafa back. Like, we could have so many conversations. I'm trying to be mindful of time, but we could have so many conversations, and we definitely will. But anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I would say that if someone's a student and like me, we're all trying to achieve mastery, I would say to take a look at the publications and the resources that are available. I think the positive thing about academia is that it teaches us how to vet sources. The ideal source is a Palestinian and an embroiderer. Mm-hmm. If it's not a Palestinian, you should take what they write with a grain of salt. If they are Palestinian, but they're men, and they didn't grow up with embroiderers or embroider, you also need to take it with a grain of salt. And I'm saying everything. The name of the motif, the geographic attribution of the motif, the history, you have to take it with a grain of salt. If it's a Palestinian embroiderer and or Palestinian woman who grew up with elders who were also, then that's the ideal source. And in addition to that, look at the date of the publication. So if you were to read a medical study that was published in 1989, would you regard that as completely relevant today? No. You would ask, well, what's emerged in the field since? Mm-hmm. We should look at our books and publications the same way. There are some books that were published in the 80s that we have different types of evidence now. It's not static. They didn't give us, that was just the research available, evidence available at the time. We have lots of other evidence since. So to just really be wary of these, and especially online sources, I find them to be very, very confusing, contradictory. A lot of misinformation propagates on social media. And it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for all of us in the field. We cannot keep up. So we just don't respond. Mm-hmm. And it's better for people instead to look at the content circulating online with a grain of salt. And unless they can find at least 3 sources that validate it, like published sources or oral histories, then they shouldn't regard it as true, simply speaking. So I just want to give that advice to your listeners, so that they can kind of, they can be wary of the misinformation out there about our cultural heritage. It's a form of dispossession. Slow, grueling, ignorant types of dispossession that ultimately distances us from the truth of our art form.
Yeah, it's definitely our responsibility as Palestinian embroiderers to learn our history properly and learn from our ancestors. And, I think to your point, it's like, we're not going to stop learning, because what we know now is what we know now. But, inshallah, 5 years from now, you're able to uncover so much more for us to learn. And then with that being said, I definitely want to encourage listeners, if you guys have any questions about Tatreez, especially related to Tatreez history, all the amazing work that Wafa does with Tatreez and Tea and the Tatreez Institute, please email us, tatreeztalk@gmail.com. We want to get your questions, and we want to have Wafa back so we could sit and just chat more, but really answer the questions that you all have. We are lucky enough to have Wafa as an amazing resource for the community. So let's definitely learn from her.
Wafa, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. One last question. Where can everyone find you? I mean, if people don't know already.
I know. Get it together if you don't know.
Kind of shame on you, but, no shame. But just for all the newbies, where can people find you and get your book, and just keep on track, because you post some really, really beautiful photos of your work at the Met as well, with stories attached to them that are so important for us to read. So tell us where all the places that they can find you.
Thank you. Instagram, Tatreez and Tea, and then I'm also with the same handle on TikTok, though I haven't been in the mood to post videos recently. And on my website, tatreezandtea.com, I have a blog and a shop and my books and
And virtual
patterns
courses, right? You have
and
virtual
virtual
courses.
courses. Yeah. And I've been digitizing museum dresses to make them more accessible so people have patterns
I
on the
got my
museum.
Intifada dress pattern.
Yes. The doves.
Amazing.
It's so beautiful because I saw Kadi stitching it. I saw it in IRL, and I was like, "Oh, this is." I don't know when I'm going to stitch it, but I just need it. So thank
Yes,
you for
yes,
doing
yes.
that.
Oh, my pleasure. The doves, yeah, they're holding streamers of the Palestinian flag. It's so beautiful, that one. So
Yeah,
creative. Though
Yeah.
our mothers, grandmothers, our legacy, just so creative, so deep, so beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
thank you, Wafat. We will
Thank you,
definitely talk
Wafa.
to you soon.
Wow, so much to think about. Where do we begin
I
in this
know,
very
right?
mini outro? We probably could do a whole other episode about that episode.
I know. It's truly like, it's honestly, first of all, it's fascinating to me that before Wafat wrote her first book, Tatreez and Tea, like she wasn't researching. She wasn't like, yes, she was through like her mom and as she said through oral history, but she like hadn't done this deep dive into, I guess, like should we say like quote unquote traditional research with like the books and all of that deep dive. So it's very impressive that she gained all of this knowledge, like all of this historic
Yeah.
academic knowledge in such a short amount of time. So yeah, I mean, thank you again, Wafat, for doing that and preserving it and sharing it with the rest of us. Like we definitely need it.
And I think ultimately, like if you flip through her Thobna book, it truly is like okay, she's getting a lot of resources from oral history and talking to people who were in the place at the time when this beautiful thing was made. But ultimately, the main storyteller is the person who stitched that dress that she highlights, and that's incredible. I mean, I think that's one of the things that has always stuck by me. I'm always like very adamant that Tatreez is storytelling. It's your way to tell a story and to be able to capture that in things that no longer have the person to speak on behalf of it is so powerful. And it really is like, I think she uses the word rescue, but it's also just like reclaiming and returning this narrative back to the rightful owner. And I think that's something just really to be applauded, to be acknowledged, to be appreciated. And we should all just be taking that in as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, to that point about her reclaiming mission with traditional Palestinian dresses, I really appreciated the fact that, the non-Palestinians that she has come across who have returned these dresses have just, wanted to do the right thing and had a very positive reaction. And it seems like she's been able to have good relationships with them afterwards. So, that's true allyship. It's one thing if you get something and you don't know what the historical, like she was saying, like some people just didn't know. They just had it in their closet. And, they decided to care. And that's beautiful. I appreciate that too.
100%. I will say though, the one thing that is my biggest takeaway was her tidbit about the muscle memory. That is so beyond magical.
But like like you feel it though, right?
Yes, you do. You really do. And I honestly, like
Yes.
as someone who's like half, I also feel it from my mom's side because really she's the one who taught me. She's the one who
She has in her culture too.
My skills are from my mom's side, to be perfectly honest. So that resonates with me as someone who is half. And I think that's just, I don't know, to all the listeners out there who haven't started Tatreez, start because it's in your hands, it's in your blood, it's in your soul. You just don't even know it and you just haven't tapped into it yet, but it's there. And I think that's just beautiful. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. I always tell people, I'm like, honestly, Tatreez is not difficult. What Tatreez is, it takes patience and it takes practice. And I love what Wafat mentioned about that Tatreez stitching strategy, because I always, in my mind, I always think of it as like this, like the Tatreez puzzle, and it's fun trying to figure out and put the puzzle together and how to stitch. But yeah, I loved everything, and yes, I definitely echo what you're saying. If you have not started stitching, please start stitching, and please make sure that it brings you joy, and don't don't stress out about it. Just do it. You'll figure it out. Trust us.
And if you guys have any questions, we've already got Wafa slated for future seasons and future episodes. So send them our way. We will compile a list of all of your most needed and most urgent questions, and we'll get her back and answer them for you. So definitely do that. Thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of Tatreez Talk. We want to hear about your Tatreez journeys and your Tatreez stories. So share them with us at tatreeztalk@gmail.com, and we might have you on an upcoming episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening platform, and make sure that you leave a 5-star review. You can follow me at Lina's Thobe and Amani at Min Amani, and definitely make sure you follow the pod at Tatreez Talk. Talk to you guys later.